If you were to read the New York Times, or the Boston Globe, or the Chicago Tribune, or pretty much anything with any regularity, or even if you turned on the television, you would find, well, let's say Law and Order. You would come to believe that the vast majority of what happens in the criminal justice system are rapes and murders. Horrible cases in which really bad criminal defendants, represented by really schlubby public defenders, and yes, I'm wearing black jeans, but don't hold it against me. I'm an author now. I wouldn't have if I was still a PD. Go into court and basically find themselves litigating these big, significant cases. What I'm here to talk to you about and tell you about is that that's not true. That represents the criminal justice system not at all. The truth of the matter is that there are about 600 murders in New York City a year. And does someone want to take a guess at how many arrests there are? Anyone? Go ahead. 13,000. A fine guess, but nowhere near accurate. You? 70,000. Shocking, but actually, that's about the number of marijuana possession arrests made in a year. Actually, it's 60,000. Who else? Come on, somebody. Don't make me give you the number. I will. No, it's less than 3 million. Yes, we've arrested everyone. Every single person. But what's shocking is it's 300,000. Think about that. Criminal arrests. 300,000 arrests in the course of a year in New York City alone. What I want to talk to you today about is the other 299,400 cases. The cases that actually are the krill of the criminal justice system. The cases that make up what happens day in and day out in the crowded courtrooms in New York City, and by extension, in the courtrooms around this country. Because the reality is, with our policing strategies, we have gone terribly, terribly off the rails. And nobody reads about it, and nobody hears about it. We don't hear about it and we don't read about it because it doesn't make for good dramatic press coverage. It doesn't make for wonderful episodes of Law and Order. The fact that the police department has arrested some guy who is selling ices in the middle of the summer for vending without a license generally doesn't make the paper. They actually did in one case because we planted that story and they took it. The fact that 60,000 people are arrested for possession of marijuana in 1 year alone doesn't make the papers. Because who cares? Well, I care. I care because I spent 12 years in the criminal justice system. I care because as a public defender, I witnessed the terrible destruction that raft of cases wreaked on poor and disenfranchised communities. And I spent a long time fighting those cases, the ones that generally got no notice, the ones that nobody cared about, the ones that private lawyers weren't striding in to proudly take and walk out before the raft of television cameras to talk about their clients' the justice of their client's cause. The reality is that the criminal justice system grinds on every single day in courtrooms around the country, basically unnoticed and unwatched. And that is terribly wrong. It's wrong because it leaves a terrible misimpression in almost everybody about what the system does and what it doesn't do, and who it helps and who it doesn't. So, hold on. Wow, I feel like everybody's flowing in here. If you talk to most prosecutors, what they'll tell you, and by the way, prosecutors, they got the good stuff, right? They're always portrayed as square-jawed and usually handsome, and they march around and they're always portrayed as really righteous, and it's really great. And if you talk to real-life prosecutors, only some of whom are jawed and seemingly righteous, what they'll tell you is they're really proud of what they do. They're thrilled. And they'll tell you a story about how they feel really, really good about having sent a serial murderer to jail. It's always a serial murderer or a serial rapist or sometimes a corrupt cop, depending on the political persuasion of the particular prosecutor you're talking about. And they'll tell you how good that made them feel. What they won't tell you about is the first few years they spent prosecuting cases. What they won't tell you about are the thousands of poor African-American kids they sent to jail, often for stuff they themselves did. Smoking weed, trespassing. The truth of the matter is, if we policed the dormitories of Columbia University the way we police the projects of the South Bronx, there would be a revolution in New York City in 48 hours. Let me tell you a little bit about what that means and what they do, and I think you'll agree with me. Does anybody know what a vertical sweep is? Anybody heard that term? Police buffs everywhere? Yeah, well, that's exactly right. In a vertical sweep of a housing project, a whole bunch of cops roll up, they seal off the front door, and they send a tactical team to the roof and another tactical team at the bottom, and the roof guys come down and the bottom guys go up. And what they do is they stop absolutely everybody in the hallway. And they say, what are you doing here? Who are you going to see? Now, people who live in the project, much like people everywhere else, are sometimes going to see their mom, their brother, their friend, because they live in 3301 South Ellis and they happen to be in 3307 South Ellis, the building around the corner. They say, I'm on my way to see Bill. Okay, where does Bill live? He's in 17F. You go up, they knock on 17F, there's nobody there. Well, you didn't call ahead. Some of my clients, they don't even have phones. Guess what they do to those people? Yes, they arrest them. Imagine this. And not just once, not just twice, it's not just one person, it's over and over. And then you know what they do? They search them. And they arrest them for marijuana, oftentimes, and lots of other things. Basically, if they did this in Columbia, if they sealed off the dorms and said, where are you going, dude? And somebody said, I'm going to see Frank. Where's Frank? He's in dorm room 1135. And you knocked on 1135 and Frank wasn't there, and you got arrested? Your mom would get called, your dad would get called, they would call somebody who would call somebody who would call the police commissioner, and they would put a stop to this like that. But that doesn't happen to my clients because they don't have access. They can't call someone who calls someone who calls someone who talks to the police commissioner. Instead, they live in a constant state of siege and a constant situation in which they are being arrested over and over and over. And while it is true, many of those arrests do not result in criminal convictions, they do result in trespass convictions, which are, you know, they're not really a crime except for the part about how a few of them and you can get deported, or another one and it leads to a crime, and that prevents you from ever getting student financial aid. This kind of policing, I'm here to tell you, essentially ruins huge swaths of poor communities of color, and it does so unfairly and unjustly. That, in essence, is what the book is about. The book is about a day in my life as a public defender. It's about all the cases you never see. It's a very anti-commercial book in a certain way. The publisher, the first thing they asked when I went in to sort of tell them about the book, they had read the proposal, they're like, yeah, but did you do any high-profile cases? Well, yeah, I did. But I don't want to write about the high-profile cases. Everybody writes about the high-profile cases. All anybody writes about are their big murder cases. Pick any legal memoir, and it's chock full of that. What nobody's willing to write about are the cases that we don't see. What nobody's willing to write about are the cases that go unnoticed, about the guy arrested for walking his dog without dog tags, without vaccination certificates, who gets a ticket. Now, would that happen in Manhattan? Imagine some really adorable, you know, well-put-together white woman carrying her little Pekingese down Fifth Avenue, getting stopped by the cop and saying, hey, ma'am, do you have your vaccination certificate? And if she said no, actually giving her a ticket? Not going to happen. But it does in the Bronx when there's a pit bull. Happens all the time. And in this particular case, I'm sorry, am I wandering too much? You want me to, I'll stay here if you want. I didn't realize there was a camera. Anyway. What winds up happening is, in one particular case that I write about, the guy calls his friend and says, hey man, I got a ticket for the dog. He goes, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll take care of that. And then the friend doesn't. So what happens? They issue a warrant. And the warrant squad comes. And someday, 9 months later, on his way to work, this guy's hauled down to court. But it's Friday night, so the system's kind of packed, so they throw him in a cell. And he stays there till Saturday. But then they're still packed, so he stays there till Sunday. And then till Monday, and 3 days later, when he finally goes to see a judge, after spending 3 days in jail for failing because his friend didn't take care of the dog tag summons, the judge goes, oh, I'll give him 2 days of community service. And when the lawyer has the temerity to say, actually, Judge, that's not really just, he's not guilty, and she says, okay, bail's $500, next case, please. That's the system that I'm here to tell you about. That's the system I'm here to talk about. And I promised I wouldn't talk for too long and would read a little bit. And I want to read a little bit of the book that is the only part of the book that's written sort of in the second person. And I wrote it that way consciously because it's the one place, the book literally is one day in my life. And by the way, it's a real day. It starts in the morning and it ends at night. I think the first line, the very first line is, I woke up dreaming, and the very last one is, tomorrow the Bronx. I mean, it literally encompasses a single day. But in this particular, it's a very digressive day, but in this particular chapter, as am I, as you can see. In this particular chapter, I try to explain this thing that perplexes people about why innocent people plead guilty. It's this idea that people don't believe it. They're like, oh, if I were, I would never plead guilty. Now, some of you get, oh yes, innocent people plead guilty to get out of jail. Well, that makes sense. Yes, everybody would do that. But that's not what's true. What's true is that innocent people will plead guilty even when there is no threat of jail time. And as with the rest of the book, where I felt like the challenge was to take the more difficult hypotheticals, in this chapter I talk about why somebody just like all of you, would plead guilty, even if you weren't guilty, just to get away. Up the street, just past the welfare building, I spy the line for the courthouse. It's the interminable waiting as much as anything else that grinds people down. It's one of the reasons the courthouse is tense, the people volatile, even why innocent people plead guilty. Indeed, once you understand how the system really works, how it wears people down, how high the frictional costs of fighting a criminal case really are, the guilty pleas of the innocent aren't just predictable, but also seem a natural product of the way the system is designed. Even without the threat of jail, copping out is not an irrational choice. Imagine for a moment being arrested. Assume you'll get special treatment, a speedy arraignment, a quick release. Your lawyer will assure you you're free from the most onerous threat in criminal prosecution, jail time. Let's say you jump to turnstile. The token you put in gets jammed, the turnstile won't rotate, so late for work and already having paid the fare, you hop over. A cop just on the other side pushes you up against the wall and cuffs you. You beg him to just go examine the turnstile, but he tells you to shut up, marches you to a small holding room where you wait until he arrests another half dozen people. You go through the system, and at arraignments, the prosecutor offers you a plea to trespass as a violation. More like a traffic ticket than a crime. Pleading guilty won't result in a criminal record, but to get the deal, you'll have to do a day of community service. You refuse. After all, you're innocent. You actually did pay the fare. Your case is adjourned for several weeks. You are released without bail. 5 weeks later, you take a day off from work to return to court. After waiting online for an hour or so, you clear the metal detectors and find the courtroom where your case will be heard. It's crowded, and the long wooden benches are filled with people looking nervously at one another or staring downward, scrupulously avoiding eye contact. For the next 2 hours, you sit and wait as case after case goes before the judge. You have not yet even seen your lawyer. You're not allowed to read. Around noon, your public defender rushes in, calling your name as he shuffles through a stack of thin, yellow, legal-sized files. Hold on just a second, he says, while he heads to the front of the courtroom to write something on a clipboard and chat with some of the prosecutors in the room. Another half hour passes. Next to you, an elderly black man with thick glasses is trying to surreptitiously read a newspaper. He keeps it low, well below the lip of the bench, folded tightly into a tiny square, and he gets away with it for nearly an hour before a court officer barks at him, and rather than face expulsion, he abandons the paper. Your lawyer finally calls your name and motions you to come outside the courtroom. Apologizing for the delays, he explains the good news. The prosecutors will, once again, offer you the trespass violation, which will spare you a criminal record. All you have to do is perform that one day of community service. Once again, you explain that because you put the token in, you never intended to defraud the system, that's the turnstile that was broken, and he listens patiently, nodding understandably. He's a nice guy and doesn't want to pressure you into pleading guilty to anything you didn't do. Still, he explains, it's a tough defense. Your word against the cops. Generally, since this is such a minor crime, you won't even get a jury trial. Just a cynical judge who usually believes the police. Also, you need to know that if you lose, you'll be saddled with a criminal record. You won't go to jail or anything. Most likely it'll just be a fine or a few days of community service. But that criminal conviction will be on your permanent record forever. It's late. The courtroom's still packed. Your lawyer tells you to think about what you want to do. Also, he warns, the system is slow. If you want to fight the case, you'll have to be patient. It looks as if your case isn't going to be heard until after lunch, so he advises you to come back until about around 2:15, an hour and a half from now. Since it's the Bronx, you don't really wander too far from the courthouse, and your food options are pretty much confined to the food court and the grimy shopping center across the street. Everything available is fried. Nothing wrong, you want to fight the case, he tells you that the next stage is to file a motion to dismiss the charges. It won't be successful, he explains, but he'll do it anyway. It's been 6 hours since you first got in line to come into the courthouse, and finally your case is called. Number 87 on the calendar, 2004 BX 10001, says the court officer standing in the center of the room. People versus, and here you hear your own name, charged with 165-615. Your lawyer strides confidently up to the well of the courtroom, motioning you to follow, and you tentatively walk up to stand beside him. You hear your lawyer and the assistant district attorney say their names. The court reporter's hands are moving, taking down every word. 140.05, 2 days community service, says the DA. No disposition, motion schedule, please, your lawyer replies. Okay, fine, file him in 3 weeks, come back May the 16th, says the judge. And that's it. The whole proceeding took about 20 seconds. Wait for me, your lawyer says, as they call the next case. And you watch as he stands up there and does the same type of thing for 4 or 5 more people. 6 or 7 minutes later, he again calls you outside, hands you a little blue slip of paper with the next court date scribbled on it. I'll see you on the 16th, he says, when we get the decision denying our motions. And then, handing you another card just in case, he asks if you have any other questions, shakes your hand warmly, and together, the two of you join the steady stream of people leaving the courthouse. 6 weeks later, your new court date arrives. You take another day off work, brave the commute to the Bronx, and once again go through the ritual of a court appearance. The hour in line, 3 more in the courtroom, unable to read, talk, work, sitting silently as the litany of cases blurs into the monotonous thrum of anonymous criminality. This time you're done by lunch. The prosecutor didn't file the response to your lawyer's motion on time, so the case is adjourned for decision. Another court date, another blue slip, 3 more weeks of worry. 3 weeks later, another day off work, another 6 hours, and this time you can't find your lawyer. Someone from his office comes in around 3 p.m. and explains he's in the middle of a murder trial. The new guy asks if you want to plead to the trespass violation, which would spare you a criminal record. It'd only be 1 day of community service, he says, and you could arrange to do it on the weekend. You explain you didn't commit the crime, you want to fight the case. Couldn't he just get you a trial? That's a long way off, he says with a smile. Around 3:30, your case is called. The judge hands both lawyers a decision, denying the defense motions, but granting a hearing on the statement you allegedly made. I jumped over it because it was broken. Outside, you explain to the substitute lawyer that the statement is true but not complete. I actually said, because it ate my token, you insist. Well, the cop says this is what you said, and most judges will probably see it as a confession, which is why they want to introduce it into evidence, the lawyer explains. The good news is we'll have a chance to suppress it at a hearing. We won't win, but we'll get some good discovery. If you have any other questions, give your lawyer a call. He smiles. A month later, you sit in court again, and you start to get frustrated. You've burned another day of vacation, wasted a ton of time, and here you are, waiting again. This time, your lawyer arrives early. Hey, I'm sorry about that last time. I was on trial over in Supreme Court, he explains, looking a little harried. Look, you say, I really want to get this over with. I know, he says kindly, but I told you, the system's slow. You've got to be patient. Let's see what happens today. He sounds encouraging. Come on, I'll be sure to get you done by lunch today. Slightly reassured, you go back into the courtroom to wait, and sitting there, forbidden to do anything useful with your time, you realize you've begun to recognize people. The prosecutors, all young, digging through their cardboard boxes of files. The court reporter silently typing on her strange little square of a machine. The court officers roughly leading prisoners into and out of court from the steel door on the side. And of course the judge, beleaguered, impatient, and brusque. And it's your turn again. At least this time when you see the judge, it's more than 45 seconds, maybe a whole minute and a half. Why can't we get rid of this? The judge asks. How about a straight CD? Your lawyer leans to you, explaining that what the judge means is if you'll just plead guilty to that trespass, he'll persuade the DA's office to drop the community service requirement. You'll just promise the judge that you'll stay out of trouble for a year, no fine, no time, no jail time, just like unsupervised probation. And standing there before the judge, you find yourself actually considering it. You're tired. It's been too long, too much for a stupid case like this. It won't be a criminal conviction, you ask? No, your lawyer says, just like I explained to you, it's more like a traffic ticket. But I'm still pleading guilty, right? Yes, he says, to the violation of trespass. It's not a crime and technically the record's sealed, but there will be a record of it as a non-criminal conviction accessible by the police, prosecutors, and others. It used to be that these records were considered sealed, but in the past few years, with the advent of ever better computers, whenever a high-profile case hits the paper, these sorts of non-criminal convictions always seem to pop up, suggesting the police department doesn't really see sealed in the same way you or I might. This is right about the time that most people just go ahead and plead. Guilty or not, they're exhausted and frustrated and want the whole thing over with. And so innocent people just like you, wind up pleading to a trespass violation or disorderly conduct. But somehow standing there before the judge, you summon up an uncharacteristic well of resolve. I'm not pleading guilty. I'm fighting this case, you tell your lawyer. No thanks, judge, is all he says to the court. Fine, get him the discovery people. Yes, judge, the bored-looking ADA says. Outside the courtroom, you get another blue slip and another court date. And next time, you get another. And the next time, another. You've used a third of your vacation time for the year and there's no trial date in sight. Downstairs in the trial assignment part, you're discouraged to find that most of the people have been waiting for trials far longer than you have, many of them 2 years or more. For all of them, and for you, the same excuses. The district attorney isn't ready, your lawyer's on vacation, so again and again it's the trip to the courthouse, the scanning, the searching, the halls full of crying, angry people and a day of waiting, a minute or two with the judge, another blue slip, another court date. Sometime in August, your child's sick, your boss needs you at work, or your court date falls during a vacation you scheduled 6 months ago. You call your lawyer, leaving a message explaining that you can't make it to court, and when you get home, there's a message from your lawyer. Because you failed to appear in court, the judge has issued a warrant for your arrest. Please call me as soon as possible. You call your lawyer. I left you a message, you explain. Yeah, I know, he says. Look, I explained the situation to the judge, and he says if you just voluntarily surrender in the next day or two, he'll just expunge the warrant. Yeah, okay, but doesn't that mean they can come and arrest me again? Well, technically, yes. Your lawyer's voice is oozing with patience, but there's not much risk of that in the next few days. Truth is, the warrant has to be sent over to the police department's warrant squad. It usually takes a couple of days, so just come in tomorrow, day after. Really, it's not a problem. A warrant for your arrest. And finally, more than before, more than that time in front of the judge, you just want this over. You don't want to talk to your lawyer anymore. You don't even want to have a lawyer. You never want to go back to that courthouse again, never stand in the lines, never deal with the searching, the scanning, the tears, and the crowds. I want to get this over with, you tell your lawyer. I can't take this anymore. All right, I'll see what I can do, he promises. You make a plan to surrender yourself on the warrant early the next morning. In the morning heat, the line seems unusually long. Maybe it's the sticky summer air or the additional apprehension of knowing that somewhere there's a warrant out for your arrest. Or because having finally decided to plead, to capitulate, you've become like everyone else in the line, ground down by the system, beaten by it. And now, having joined them, everything feels different. You shuffle along with the same distracted gait that everyone else around you sports. The building seems grayer somehow, the chatter darker. The constant barrage of barked orders from the dozen uniformed court officers manning the magnetometers seems more ominous, more controlling. The inevitable argument or ejection or the occasional arrest seem profoundly part of a vast regime of calculated brutality. Inside the courtroom, the court officer looks at you with raised, impatient eyebrows. I have a warrant, you stammer, and my lawyer told me to just tell you and give you the docket number so I can get it taken care of. Scribbling the docket number on a scrap of paper, the court officer looks at you with utter indifference. Take a seat, is all he says. The day drags on with the usual rhythm. One after another, the people surrounding you on the benches get up for their 45 seconds with the judge. Your lawyer checks in once late in the morning and explains that because you're a warrant, the DA's office doesn't have the file yet. You can try to see the judge and then come back another day, or wait until the afternoon when, if you're lucky, the DA's office will be able to find someone in the file room to get your file and bring it from the warrant room down to the courtroom. Let's just get it over with, you hear yourself murmuring, agreeing to come back at 2:15. You skip the fast food offerings of the food court across the street. Hungry or not, it's better to just spend a few hours quietly reading in the hallway rather than dealing with coming back into the courthouse after lunch. And so you sit, waiting as the building empties out, recently released inmates bounding down the stairs, their orange jail-issue slippers flashing in the midday light, lawyers by twos and threes chatting animatedly to one another, dejected girls with tear-stained cheeks muttering, "No, Mommy, he ain't coming home today," into their cell phones. The doors swing open around 2:20, and you're swept into the courtroom with the tide of lawyers and defendants eager to have their cases called first thing after lunch. There's no judge on the bench. She doesn't arrive until about 10 minutes after the floating sea of humanity has settled down. And in the meantime, lawyers and cops fill in the front row. A kid with an oversized Pele jacket and dreads slumps defiantly in the last, and everyone spreads out evenly in the 6 rows between. Your lawyer strolls in, sees you and waves. "Hold on," he tells you, "I need to make sure the DA's office got your file. You still want to get this over with, right?" You've rarely wanted anything so much in your life. "Please," is all you say. Your lawyer and the DA slip outside through a back door, the one the judge just came in. You get a quick glimpse of a ratty, unembellished hallway beyond, and then the door closes and the first cases of the afternoon are called. Finally, the ADA and your lawyer reappear, and your lawyer strides purposely out through the swinging gates, hitching a finger at you, beckoning you out into the hallway. "There's good news and there's bad news," he says, starting abruptly. "The good news is if you want this over today, we can still do that, and you can do it without pleading guilty to a crime." He looks at you soberly and then, plowing forward, says, the bad news is we can't get that conditional discharge back. The DA's being all stupid about the warrant and about why it took you so long to just take the plea, so she's back to a day of community service. You feel your face start to flush as the futility of trying to fight begins to sink in. You're already imagining yourself in one of those jumpsuits, cleaning a park with one of those weird pointy sticks designed to skewer garbage, a nasty woman with a Queen's accent pestering you to hurry up. You can almost feel the shame and humiliation, the damp, cool air on your skin, the depressing view of the tumble-down urban park, the idling minivan waiting to take you back to the pickup point, and you're back to thinking, to hell with this, let's just go to trial, when your lawyer continues, but she has agreed to a $50 fine instead. The building knot between your shoulder blades starts to subside. All of a sudden, paying money seems like a relief. The fine like some kind of oasis, a link to a familiar world far from the lunacy of this building. A fine you can do. A fine's fine. You almost feel grateful. Oh, one other thing, the lawyer explains. He makes an undecipherable notation on his file. With the mandatory court costs and victim services fees, that'll actually come to almost $150. I just thought I should let you know so you're not surprised. Well, you are surprised, but you're also kind of limp, exhausted from the process, feeling as though you could just be done with this. If you could just get it over with, you could go back to your life, put the whole thing behind you, forget that the Bronx Criminal Courthouse even exists. I don't have that much money on me today, you explain. Oh, no problem, he shrugs. You'll have 3 months to pay it. You agree and return to the courtroom. Now that it's 3:30 or so, the audience has gotten thin. Without much ado, your case is called. The judge starts in on you before you have a chance to say anything. Where were you the other day, she demands. You weren't ready for this. It's one of the only times the judge has ever even addressed you directly. And you notice that just behind you, a court officer slides into place, blocking your exit, gently unsnapping the little black leather belt pouch that holds his handcuffs. Your Honor, you stammer, explaining the situation, words tumbling out. I called my lawyer in advance. I tried to explain. I mean, I can show you proof. The judge obviously could not care less about any of it, and it feels as if things are getting out of control when your lawyer finally interrupts. Judge, he says calmly but firmly, we have a disposition of this case. This seems to back the judge off, and she turns to the ADA. People, the people's offer is a $140.05 and a $50 fine, says the DA. The court officers seem to relax slightly. Your Honor, your lawyer says, a practiced staccato rhythm taking over. After consultation with my client, he's authorized me to withdraw previously entered pleas of not guilty and enter a plea of guilty to a violation of penal law, section 140.05. It's a trespass is a violation, not a crime, in full satisfaction of the docket. We'll waive allocution, stand ready for sentence. The judge listens impassively, scribbling a seemingly more complicated note on the file. People, is all she says. That's correct, Your Honor, says the ADA with barely a nod in your direction. Fine, snaps the judge. Is that what you want to do? She asks you. Plead guilty in the case? Her voice comes to you from far away. It's hard to believe you're doing what you're doing, and as you stand before the judge, pleading guilty, agreeing to pay a fine for a crime you didn't commit, there's a strange disjunction, a disconnect between your brain and your mouth. Yes, Your Honor. You manage to croak. Now, did anyone force you or threaten you to make you plead guilty to this charge? The judge asks. Once again, flashes of the mountain of blue slips, the interminable delays, the stress, the warrant, the lines. Your lawyer glances over at you, sensing your momentary hesitation. No, Your Honor, you murmur quietly. And are you pleading guilty because you are in fact guilty? And there it is, the ultimate question. The judge hasn't even looked up. And in some crazy way, you want your lawyer to stop this train, to pipe up and insist that here and now, that you take back this horrible plea, that you, an innocent person, demand your trial. You want him to protect you from happening, just like the judge, just like the judge and the ADA, he is simply waiting for your answer, for the moment when, under oath and in a court of law, you admit to a crime you didn't commit. Another moment of hesitation. And it's just then that the judge looks up and raises her eyebrows. The air is heavy, the court officer behind you seems alert again, and the prospect of coming back is simply too much to bear. You've come this far, you're on the spot, and seconds from having the whole thing over. Just do what you have to do, you tell yourself, swallowing hard. Your lawyer turns to you whispering, I thought you wanted to get this over with. Then, taking a lungful of air, you grit your teeth, you square your shoulders, and you say it. Yes, Your Honor. You barely hear the judge as she pronounces in the same monotone you've heard her use 1,000 times, sentence you to a fine of $50, mandatory surcharges are imposed. That's $145 payable at the cashier, Your Honor, before October 21st. Next case, please. And that's it. The judge tosses, literally tosses, the stapled sheaf of papers that represent your criminal justice nightmare into a wire basket on the side of the bench next to where the clerk of the court sits. You're mesmerized by the slowly spinning airborne file. The court officer melts back, allowing you to walk out, following your lawyer, who, smiling kindly, hands you a slip of paper with the amount and payment instructions, shakes your hand, wishes you good luck, and in a single smooth gesture turns smiling toward yet another waiting client. And that's how it goes, day in and day out. The rage and frustration, the volume and delay, grinding people down until the only plausible option for most is to opt out of the system entirely. That's the goal, of course. Realistically, the system can only try 1 of every 100 cases, which means there has to be a way to make the other 99 cop out. When arrest rates for minor infractions are as high as they are, in the Bronx alone there are more than 50,000 misdemeanor arrests a year, and citywide that figure has been as high as 250,000. Almost all of them tiny infractions like trespassing, train hopping, disorderly conduct, or possession of marijuana. The system must be rigged to coerce pleas. Judges know this. Everyone knows this. When the NYPD makes 62,691 marijuana arrests in a single year, there cannot possibly be enough judges, public defenders, and courtrooms to create a just hearing and trial system. The only alternative is to make exercising your rights functionally impossible. Of course, the people like you, those pleading guilty to the non-criminal offenses, they have it easy. As frustrating as the waiting is, it does not begin to compare with the experiences of those who are actually in jail. The more than 15,000 New York City residents, many of whom are incarcerated on misdemeanor charges, who on any given day are not perched on the benches where you sat, but are instead sitting in the steel cages, just behind the scarred metal door at the other end of the courtroom, waiting in jail for their turn in court. Thank you. So hopefully we have time for some questions, yes? So, I mean, there's plenty more I can read, but, yeah, yes?
Just a comment. I fell into the vortex of parking in the South Bronx. And I was accused of driving around with an expired registration.
Well, shame on you. I hope they put you in jail for a good long time.
Well, fortunately, I pleaded guilty for something I didn't do. But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But what was so interesting was to drive through the South Bronx and see the broken buildings and the broken communities and the broken people who lived in those areas where those courts were, and to go in and be told that my registration, when it was read, was really for a parking offense, which was not so.
Right.
It was very disheartening.
Yeah, it is incredibly disheartening. I don't know, did people hear that more or less? Okay. Yeah, it is incredibly disheartening, and it's incredibly pervasive. And one of the things I think we ignore all the time is just how many people fall into the system annually. I mean, all the time. It's, the craven maw of the criminal justice system is astonishing. And in fact, the biggest public works project in the South Bronx recently has been a new courthouse, because that's just what we need. What we really need, despite the massive Supreme Court, which if any of you have been to Yankee Stadium, you've seen that unbelievably massive building on the hill, and beyond it is the criminal courthouse. But what we really need is yet another courthouse, which is basically the mouth end of the criminal justice system, as far as I'm concerned, the consuming end. It is incredibly disheartening, and it's deeply pervasive. And I guess that's part of the message. That's part of the message of the book, because I think it reflects a terribly misguided policing strategy that we need to do something about. And to some extent, our biggest failing, I think socially one of our biggest failings, is the fact that we continue to perpetuate this particular system. Shoot.
What do you feel, based on your experience, is a cure to this problem?
The cure question. Let me say 2 things about that. I have a few ideas, but some of the criticism of the book has been, you don't propose solutions. And I just want to say outright that that's absolutely true, and I reject the idea that that a diagnosis is inaccurate because you don't prescribe something. I mean, it's like, if you've got incurable cancer, I can't cure it, but I can tell you got it, and that's a service. So yes, if you're looking for answers in the book, you won't find them. It is the descriptive diagnosis of the problem. Are there answers? I do think there are answers. I think the war on drugs is horrifically misguided. I think that it does far more harm than good. I think taxing and legalizing would be huge. I think fundamentally the broken windows policing strategy is misguided and awful. I think that community policing has shown the same kinds of crime decreases that the broken windows policing has at a far lower cost to communities of color and disenfranchised people. And I think that solving community problems on a community-wide basis, rather than trying to incarcerate our way out of the problems, is the solution, is the main solution. I think that what winds up happening, the fundamental problem with broken windows, is that it shifts the emphasis from systemic failures to personal ones. Instead of saying, you know, oh, you're a bad guy because you peed in public, it allows us never to ask the question, well, gee, why don't we have bathrooms in the South Bronx that are available to people? Why haven't we cured the social ills that are pervasive? It allows us to dodge the significant and important social questions. So that's about as much cure as I can offer in a minute. Other people? Yeah?
How long have you been doing this job?
I was a public defender for a little more than a dozen years. I started in Brooklyn in 1990 or 91. I took a year off after kind of flaming out in the mid-90s. I went to work for the Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York City, which is the largest police oversight agency in the country, and found it to be profoundly corrupt. And I'm not suggesting literally corrupt. There's no payola. It's simply that, to my mind, it did more harm than good because it offered the false sense of resolution. What happened was, at the time, it basically functions, in my view, as an arm of the police department and winds up protecting the cops it's designed to prosecute, and I couldn't take it. So I left and went back. This will sound strange to many of you. Went back to what I believe to be an incredibly righteous and morally unambiguous job, that of the public defender. And I went and I worked in Harlem for a bunch of years, and then when my colleague, boss, mentor, friend, Robin Steinberg started the Bronx Defenders, which I think is now one of the best public defender offices in the country. I was lucky to be the first lawyer she hired, and I went up there with her, and I had about 7 great years in the Bronx trying to raise the level of practice, institutionally raise the level of practice up there, from what was kind of a go along, get along community to one of real solid litigation, which our clients desperately, desperately need and deserve. So I did it for about a dozen years. You should know, I left to write the book only because if you read the book, you'll understand why you can't be a public defender and write a book. I wrote the book proposal from 11 at night to 1 in the morning for 3 months just to get the proposal done. And then after I got the contract, it was clear to me I would sort of never finish it unless I just dedicated myself to writing, which is what I've done. And I miss it enormously. It was, being a writer is really, really fun, and you spend an enormous amount of time in your bathrobe. But at the end of the day, it doesn't, you don't go to sleep with the feeling of righteous satisfaction. I didn't go to sleep with the feeling of righteous satisfaction that I did when I was a frontline public defender, and I miss that. It's great, great, great work.
That's what I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Tell us what a good day is like, because we're on the other side.
Well, you know, here's what's funny. I'd like to say, and this is very weird. I'd like to say that almost all of them were good days. Strangely, and this is very odd to people, I loved being a PD. I graduated law school with a whole bunch of people who went on to become partners at firms. Let me tell you something, their lives were miserable, not just when they were crappy associates getting crapped on, not just because they had 1 million pages of discovery to divide up between 35 paralegals, not just because they wrote stupid memos about inane points of law and had no contact with clients, but like their lives, they were caught up in this astonishingly dehumanizing system, or at least I think so. I think Foucault, I will cycle back to the answer, but in Discipline and Punish, Foucault says that the more advanced a social structure, the more subtle the modes and means of penal control. And I found a big law firm to be proof positive of that thesis. My sense was that I worked at Dewey Ballantine as a summer associate to pay off law school, and I was there with all these people from like Harvard and Yale. I mean, these were the people who like had never ever failed. You know, they won the tests in 2nd grade, and they went on to annoy their colleagues and be the gunners in law school and like graduate, you know, Phi Beta Kappa and yada yada yada. And here they were, like hand on the brass ring, and they were like slaves. They were like nattering. Oh, did you see this one gave that one an assignment, and that's better than my assignment. And you look at them and you're like, people, what is going on with you? Like, this is unreal. And I found it astonishing that smart, strong, capable people would be so humbled by that system. And what I can tell you is I had the opposite experience. My experience every single day in going in and representing clients was one of empowerment and enjoyment and absolute soul-clenching terror. Because the truth of the matter is, the stakes are never higher than in criminal law. Never, never. You know, it's like you can pick any civil case in the world, and at the end of the day, somebody's going to be richer and somebody's going to be poorer. And is it stressful? Yeah, it's stressful. But you know what I say over and over to my friends? Nobody goes to jail at the end of the day. And that's fundamentally the difference between criminal law and civil. That's fundamentally the difference between being a public defender. You can't get stakes any higher. And because the stakes are so high, the work is profoundly important. And what's strange is you come, or I came, to really revel in the day-to-day. To go in, and you know what? You get your butt kicked every day as a public defender. You're reviled. You're assumed to be incompetent. People, even nice people, pat you on the back and say, oh, that must be a wonderful experience. You know, because the presumption is that this is only a stepping stone to something else, and they smile and pat you on the back and say, well, what are you going to do next? And you're like, well, I don't know, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm doing. I like this. And like even my own father found it incredibly hard to like get his mind around that this is what I wanted to do, and this was important. And you know when that changed? The day he came to court with me and walked around and met my clients and talked and watched me talk to them and watched me counsel them and came into court with me, came into the pens with me. At the end of the day, he was dumbstruck. And he said, oh my God, I had no idea. I had no idea. And you can't imagine how easy it is, despite what everybody thinks, to make real, significant, and lasting connections to the clients that you represent. And at the end of the day, that's what drove me, that's what satisfied me, that's what engaged me, was that these are people. People who are in desperate, dire need, people who are voiceless, people who are disenfranchised, but so deeply people. And once you get to know them, and you meet their moms, and you find out what they have for breakfast and where they always wanted to go on vacation, and you realize that they've never been on an airplane before, or they have this or haven't done that, and you know where they hang out, all of a sudden, they're the kind of full, vibrant, it's the full, vibrant, interactive experience that lawyers everywhere else just don't get. And we do, and it's really, really great. So a good day is pretty much every day. And by the way, it doesn't mean it's not debilitating. It doesn't mean you don't walk out at the end going, oh my God, I can't do this another day. Oh my God, I'm so exhausted. You're always exhausted. And fundamentally, one of the things somebody said about the book in a review that I thought was really interesting that I hadn't considered was that really, it's a romance. And the truth of the matter is, it is a romance. Criminal defense work is the triumph of optimism over experience. It's why I'm a really bad poker player. Like, I always think I'm going to pull it on the river, you know? I always think the card that's going to turn is my card. And part of that is, I always think, I really do, that tomorrow, I got my ass kicked today, but you know, I'm going to get back there tomorrow, and I'm going to turn this baby around. And it's great. And if you're even remotely constituted that way, you can't find better work. So. Other questions? Yeah.
As a public defender, are you appointed by a court?
Yes, that is, in a certain way, that is the definition of a public defender. The way it works in the Bronx is I work for a not-for-profit that has a contract with the city of New York to do 15,000 cases a year. If you happen to be arrested on a Sunday or Monday, you get someone from the Bronx Defenders, unless you're a co-defendant or you've retained private counsel. So literally Sunday and Monday come in, we go in there, they bring out a stack of cases that represent the arrests from the night before. Those are our clients. That's who you get.
You will have enough time to really investigate them?
At the Bronx Defenders, you never have enough time. The truth of the matter is, I don't know that there is such a thing as enough. I think that even if my caseload was half of what it actually was, I would go home at the end of the day thinking, damn, I didn't do this, damn, I didn't do that, God, if only I had this. You gave it your all and you forgive yourself for going home. So, but the Bronx Defenders is because we pay our lawyers so little, we resource the other areas of the work, like social workers and investigators, and it's one of the reasons that the office is so darn good. Yeah?
Are you still doing it? Are you going to go back?
I'm not sure. I'm not doing it now. I have like 1 or 2 cases, but I'm certainly not a frontline PD now, partly because I'm coming around doing things like this, and hoping that one of you will go out and go, damn, that was a really good book. Now I'll go be a public defender. And you give 3 years of your life, and that relieves me of some of my guilt for having given it up. So I'm hoping that you do. And will I go back? I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard transition back. I might. I want to. I actually was talking to my boss the other day about, well, maybe, you know, or maybe I could do it on contract basis. So I don't know. Answer is I don't know. Yes.
Hi. Now, the case you spoken about seemed like a very minor infraction, jumping this turnstile.
Yes.
How high up in the category of felonies would a public defender be called?
I got everything. Well, one of the last cases I tried was a murder one, a death case where they precluded death, and the capital defender called and said, Dave, please take this one. And I did, like a fool, because it took months and months and months. It was a 2-month trial.
Then you stay on that one case, or you have others as well?
Yes, I had a caseload of about 70 at that time, and they just were all on hold while I was on trial on my murder. So, yeah.
They were on hold, so then you stay on that one, because
you stay on all of them. It's vertical representation. They're your clients. You go right on through. Should I take more questions? Should I sign books? Should I hang out? You tell me, Jeff.
It's up to you. You get some,
I got plenty of time. So,
more questions.
hold on, because you asked one, so I want to get the people who didn't, like you.
Yeah, can you give us some idea of what kind of income? I mean, living in New York must be
How much income?
expensive.
Oh yeah.
I've heard people complain that they really can't go into public defense because they really couldn't afford to live in Boston.
I think that's nonsense. I'll tell you how I did it, and I'll tell you exactly how much people made. I made $29,500 a year my first year as a public defender. After I passed the bar, I got a raise to $31,000. The only difference that made was I allowed myself to take a taxi once a month, and I got toppings on my pizza, literally. Instead of subsisting on cheese, I got sausage, and that pretty much ate up my raise. Yeah, I live in the same rent-stabilized 380 square foot studio that I moved into when I first moved to New York. But you know what? I'm happy, and I loved it, and I don't regret it for a second. I don't. I don't buy the idea that everybody's so saddled with loans that they can't do it. There are loan forgiveness programs. Frankly, you can go out and work for a firm during the summer and still go be a PD. And you know, you can just go out. And the truth is, you just make it work. What I will say is this: don't go and get a firm job and say you're going to be a public defender later. You won't. You just won't. I know you all think you will, but you won't. The reason is systems are bigger than people. You ally yourself with the system that you go into. And the truth of the matter is, let me tell you, it's always easy to make more money. It's really hard to make less. So start at the bottom, deal with it. You're young, it's good, you'll have a great time.